So let's see, 9:02, we can start in on the official Wayside Cleanup office hours. Today is Thursday, April 1st. And it's 9 a.m. and it's your chance to ask any questions for us to update you on things that we're doing. I guess the big news this week, which is only tangentially related to wayside cleanup, but it really is big news, is the climate bill that the governor signed this week. And it will affect all of us, including certainly wayside cleanup, not as much as it's going to affect the Bureau of Air and Waste. It's both probably exciting and terrifying for them, but it's kind of great steps forward for the state. 100% net zero by 2050. 50% in steps, 50% by 2030, 75% by 2040. So we have some good goals to work towards. And kind of more directly, I think a little bit more directly related to wayside cleanup, although again, not directly, it also contained environmental justice provisions that are looking, and this is kind of related to, I say it's related to wayside cleanup only in that we also deal with exposure and struggling with the question of, what does it mean to have sites kind of situated in locations where people are also being exposed to other things, and there's an environmental burden being felt by the community. So this is an interesting piece of the bill, and this has to do primarily with air permitting. First, it requires expanded MEPA review of projects that might impact air quality within 1 mile, that are located within 1 mile of an environmental justice neighborhood. And it also, and this is where it gets really interesting for me, is it requires DEP to first to conduct a stakeholder process with the goal of developing a cumulative impact analysis methodology that DEP would apply for certain air permitting of certain projects. So it would look at not only what are the exposures and the emissions from that particular project, but it would put it in a context of what's also going on in the community and what is the incremental effect of this new project that's being proposed. So it's a interesting concept to have there, kind of certainly a different way of looking at permitting new projects.
Can I ask you about that?
Sure.
We used to, back in my MEPA days in the dark ages, we had to look at cumulative impacts as well. What do you think, when you say other things going on, to what level do you think you'll be looking? Is it traffic? Is it number of houses? Is it, what level do you think you'll be looking at for making that evaluation?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're going, that will be part of the stakeholder process to look at what other exposures would be of concern. I think at a minimum you would be, and this is me just going on about something I know nothing about. At a minimum, we'd be looking at other facilities that we regulate. I think that would be one aspect of it, and then how much you kind of look beyond that to things like traffic and highways and things like that. Certainly is within our kind of wheelhouse of evaluating effects of mobile emissions from traffic. We do that, or some parts of us do that. So that might be part of it. I don't know whether it's kind of residential density would fit into that, whether it would take into account emissions from furnaces and things like that. I don't know how fine-grained that kind of analysis, certainly at this point, can be, but this legislation is setting us on the road to find out and start asking those questions and working with the communities to see kind of what can be done now while setting up perhaps data gathering processes and developing methods to refine it and improve it over time. I do remember back when I was in ORS, way back in probably around the year 2000, there was some interest in looking at cumulative impact analysis around some facilities as well. And there's some discussion of that, but I think it's good to have kind of a legislative mandate for us to do it, to kind of push that sort of thing along.
The green palm is gone, but does this fall into under the green remediation concept under the
the cumulative impact analysis?
Well, again, it's just that we're supposed to be looking at the impacts of our remedial efforts as well, right?
It could fall into that. I think
that could fall into it, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
I mean, we are supposed to be looking at things like, are we going to excavate all the soil and then have 100 trucks run for 20 days and,
yep.
and then, running through the dense neighborhood next to the school?
Yep. Yeah, the kind of one question I would have, how, and this is really the shift in looking at cumulative impact analysis. What was it we looked at before? It's more or less, we have been looking at, certainly from the 21E perspective, the incremental risk from the contamination at this particular site. The language of the statute is the oil and hazardous material at or from the disposal site of concern. So even in looking at the effect that the remedial action might have, the risks and other effects it might have on the surrounding community, you're looking kind of at that a little bit more in isolation. And this, I think, signals that in the future, we may be not only looking at isolation, but looking at how that incremental impact then affects the overall risks and overall exposure, overall quality of life in the surrounding community a little bit more explicitly. I don't know how it would play out, and certainly what was passed by the legislature and signed into law last week, or this week, is not directly related to waste site cleanup, but I think it's a big step in a direction that the department hasn't really gone down before. We haven't had the legislative mandate to do it before, kind of the legal rationale for it. So it will be interesting to see kind of how it plays out, and whether at some point in the future, that language that I just quoted from the statute, the oil and hazardous material at or from the disposal site, how that kind of our mandate might change sometime in the future as well, to put our sites in more context. Again, I've always, I think waste site cleanup comes at all of this from a different perspective, in that, we have to work with what's given, what we find out there. And, I think our actions are starting with contamination in the environment and making it better, eliminating exposures, cleaning up sites, and reducing them, reducing the risks, rather than trying to figure out whether we can permit a facility that might incrementally add to a situation. So we're philosophically, I think our program is different from some of the other regulatory programs, but even then, I think there's some room in there to look at what we're doing in the context of what else is going around in the surrounding community. Again, not directly related to us, but it does open up kind of a lot of possibilities for kind of what might happen in the future and how we should look at these. And then with the other part of it, it is the climate bill. there's a lot going on the climate side of things, and that, obviously we say cleanup is kind of looking at how our cleanups are both might affect climate change and, more importantly, be affected by the by climate change. And Ken is here. Ken is working with you guys in the LSP Association on some of that. One of the things that we're doing, again, kind of related, we had a meeting this week over in the Marine Oil Spill Act world, the MOSPR program run by Julie Hutchison and Steve Mahoney. We're working with a contractor now to do an analysis of how climate change might affect the transport and response to marine oil spills as well. So we've asked Ken to help out with that, and that's probably something we'll come to the advisory committee with once we get more meat on the bones of what we're hoping to do there.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of interesting stuff. And you can find the climate change bill all over the place if you just search for Massachusetts climate change bill. There's a mass.gov press release out there that I'm looking here now. I could put it up, but it's it's a press release. But there are a lot of links to it, and I would recommend kind of going through it. There's a lot in there. In the PFAS world, we're continuing. We're starting to get the results in from the private well testing. Still, I was looking at the numbers, and there's still too few to actually do any meaningful summary statistics for you guys. But I think I'll do that once we get more data. Show you how that's going. Basically what we're finding now is the majority of them are coming up non-detect. A couple detections and things we're following up on. But
are you getting the number of volunteers you needed from a number of communities? You get distribution and so forth. Is that working out okay?
Yeah, I think it does vary town by town, kind of the enthusiasm that you get for it. Let's see, I think I have some numbers up about the, so far we have, we're probably up over 600 homeowners that have applied, have put in express interest. Now, some of these are not even in towns that we're focusing on. So the fact that 600 people have signed up on the website and said, we're interested when you come to our town, doesn't mean all of them will come there. I think we're, and I'll look to Gerard, he may have a better idea for the Southeast towns. I think roughly there's kind of 40 or so slots for each town that we're looking to fill, kind of on a grid pattern to get a good distribution. And I think, we're doing that. I think we're probably finding in most towns that it's easy to get, we're getting at least 40 people interested.
Good.
So far so good. We'll see how the results play out. In the public water supply stuff is playing out probably a bit more publicly as well. I think they're up to, let's see, I have a dashboard up here. 222 of the 351 towns have had public water supply testing. Over 1,800 samples have been taken, and we're kind of working through our funding for that, which is good. Yeah, so, and I think they also announced another round of grants to help towns with planning for treatment for the systems that do come up with contaminated water supplies. So we're working working with the towns, I think the regions, particularly the drinking water program, but also the waste cleanup staff are being kept busy by working with the towns. The drinking water program dealing with things like public notice and public education and how to manage the water supplies. If a town is lucky, they're able to take a well offline with no major impact on the water quantity of water that they can supply. Others don't have as much flexibility and are struggling, so we're working with them as well.
Paul?
Yes.
One of the questions that came up after the advisory committee meeting, or maybe during, but anyway, the concern that, the department has, indicated they'd use great enforcement discretion and try to make it as easy on the homeowner as possible if they choose to do this in case something was found or something. But the point was made that apparently some boards of health have the ability to tell a homeowner that they can no longer use their well if it has contaminants exceeding criteria.
Well, the primary regulator of private wells is the Board of Health.
Right.
Yeah. And they have very broad powers in to deal with health issues. And that's one of the reasons why, before we start testing that, the Board of Health is on board, and we talk with them about potential outcomes and what might happen. So I don't think that they would be in a situation where they're saying, close down the well. I think we are, when we get the results back, and again, we don't have a lot of actual kind of elevated levels in the private well testing program to be able to say, oh, we have been doing this, because frankly, we don't have a lot of cases. But when we get results back, we expect to be talking not only with the homeowners, but with the board, but also with the Board of Health.
Okay.
And in going through the usual, we are working with them to talk about things like use of bottled water, use of poets to treat it. So I think well, yes, it is a kind of a possibility. The Board of Health does have the ability to just say, nope, shut it down, you're screwed. I think our experience with boards of health is first that they rely upon us to a great extent to provide the technical and risk assessment expertise and to work with them. And we view that as one of our roles, to work closely with the Board of Health. And what we're trying to find in this is a way to make sure that the homeowner is drinking safe and appropriate water. And the Board of Health, boards of health, I have found, and I hope all of you have found, have generally been very reasonable and understanding and helpful, and share the same goals. So, but as we get more experience, it will be interesting, certainly to see, and then kind of relay to everybody kind of how it's all going. The other thing coming out of it, of course, is that the data that we'll be getting is going to be useful for kind of answering a lot of the questions that we all have about how much PFAS is out there, where is it coming from, what are the potential sources, how many of those sources are in fact subject to regulation in various forms by various entities, and how can we reduce people's exposure, how can we reduce PFAS from getting into the environment in the first place, kind of all of that. So,
okay.
Yeah, and we're hoping to see similar data from other states as well, to see how we're comparing with everybody else that has done or will be doing private well sampling like this.
In discussions with Dr. Lohman at URI, who was in the PFAS sampling course and had talked about doing the air sampling, one of the questions he was, I guess, discussing with people, I guess they work with Harvard and all, but the idea of having PFAS sampling at the air monitoring stations, just to see what the general background, if you will, air deposition of PFAS might be. That would be your air
Yeah.
and waste people, not you.
Well, it would, except we're all we're all in this PFAS thing together.
Right.
You know, we meet every week with the commissioner, all the programs, all the regions, to discuss all the various aspects of PFAS, and so I get to stick my nose into other people's programs where PFAS is concerned, and they get to do the same thing with waste site cleanup. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things going on with PFAS, kind of that you might put in the category of it would be great to test this for PFAS. And so there are some things going on, like working with USGS on surface water testing for PFAS that is going on. There are, we have in the past tested cranberries. We'll be testing other things that might be affected by sites. So there's a certain amount of research being done kind of proactively, like the surface water testing, because we're trying to get out ahead of some of those questions. And I would throw kind of air monitoring out there as well as one of those kind of more proactive things, at least so far. And then we're also experiencing a lot of reactive testing. So it's trying to find that balance and the resources to deal with everything. But you've seen, in the news, for example, the question about PFAS in the pesticides used for spraying for mosquitoes, the Anvil 10+10.
Right.
Which was testing that was done by a private entity, by PEER, Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. And they brought that to our attention, and then we followed up on that. That takes, that diverted a lot of resources. I mean, not to say it wasn't justified or anything, but it was unexpected. So we are trying to balance some of those brush fires that come up like that, where it's not part of our longer term plan, and trying to prioritize the more kind of research project sort of things of trying to find the sources of PFAS and kind of what media would it be good to sample in. So I'll ask about the kind of plans for air sampling, but I think, as you have probably seen, we're focusing a lot on water at the moment, drinking water, and then sources of drinking water and wastewater. And there's a lot of work being done on biosolids. And we've had a working group or public meetings related to that last fall. So there are a lot of PFAS balls in the air.
So did you find it in cranberries?
No, we didn't.
Oh, good. I'm happy to hear that. That would have been a real shit show.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Yeah, we did the same thing with EDB and cranberries in the 90s. I remember back when Trudy Cox was secretary, being in those meetings.
Larry, did you test for it in your Passover salt water that the entrepreneurial person was selling?
No, we actually went old school and put our own salt in. Hopefully that was okay.
Well, had you tested your tap?
It's MWRA. It has to be good, Matt.
MWRA has been tested, and it is good. And I willingly drink it. There it is. So those are kind of the summary things I've got for you. Any topics you want to talk about, or any questions? We have no word about us going back to the office or anything. And, any reconstruction of the office that has been done recently is completely deconstruction and at my initiative. So
I
nothing.
assume the review of the MCP is just sort of trundling along as we've discussed before.
Yes, I think we are making progress. We plan on making more progress tomorrow, specifically meeting, going over another section. And so, yes, I think it is continuing to make progress.
So on a follow-up to the sort of outreach EJ, discussion last week and at the advisory committee meeting, the question came up, which I hadn't thought of, so it's not, I can't claim this, but have you ever thought of translating the MCP into Spanish or any other language? Just to add pour salt into the wound there.
Es muy difícil, Senor Hackman. Es muy difícil.
No, but it was brought out, I asked Sam or someone else to, whether that might be helpful or not. But I mean, in terms of reaching out to groups, I mean, if your main document isn't even, legible to them, I don't know.
Well, first
might be something to ask.
Maybe they'll make more sense in Spanish.
No, the MCP makes sense. Have you read the RECRA regs? Well, in the I think we're biting off what we think we can chew in doing the guidance documents, the explanatory guides to how the wayside cleanup program works overall. I think that's relatively low hanging fruit. I think some of those would be complex. Have any of you heard of any program translating the actual regulations into a different language? That I would think that the wayside cleanup, the MCP would, well, it does make sense, and it's certainly would be nice to have in a different language. It wouldn't be the place I would start if I were embarking upon translating regulations into a different language. That would be jumping into the deep end of the pool.
I was giving you the opportunity, given the date of announcing that the wayside cleanup was translating the MCP into Spanish. Because there's an easy out on today.
Oh, I completely missed that. Yes, I'll run it through Google Translate and see what comes up. And that's probably good enough, really.
It'll make as much sense that way. Don't worry about it, Paul.
Yep, and I'll do it in Chinese as well. Maybe get the first few lines tattooed. Yes.
I'll save you, Paul, here.
Yes, thank you.
So I apologize if this is something that was discussed last week and I haven't listened to the recording, but at the advisory committee meeting, Liz and you mentioned doing risk guidance quickly following, or I don't know if the word was quickly, but following the release of the MCP. And also you mentioned about public involvement guidance. And I didn't know if you meant generally those are in the lineup or if those are kind of the top two priorities now. And if you could give us a little bit of a sense of maybe what the order is or timing.
So let's see. So for prioritization sort of thing, keep in mind the risk guidance, the primary office for that would be in the Office of Research and Standards. And they have been kind of editing, revising sections of their risk assessment guidance document, or at least thinking about it and doing some informal editing. for a while now. So I think they are ready. They are getting ready to have a draft kind of to go public and discuss. So that was their and they prioritize kind of their work. But it has been a while since there have been kind of revisions to that document. So they recognize that was needed. The public involvement stuff, we're kind of putting a higher priority because of the one, it's been a while since the public involvement has been updated. It would be good to mesh it with both the reg changes that will be coming out that are related to it, the internal PIP guidance that we have, and the focus on environmental justice and how DEP can better do outreach. There are some things in that would translate well into our public involvement guidance for the outside world. So that's a good opportunity. And last but not least, the technical assistance grants are kind of working their way to being publicly announced. Might be Earth Day-ish would be a good announcement day, perhaps.
Wow, that's nice. That'd be fun.
Always nice to have something to give to higher ups and say, oh, you want to talk about something on Earth Day?
Yeah. That's great.
So that might be something, and it gives a target date for kind of prioritizing that.
So those were more specifically imminent than that, and that's specifically why they were mentioned, as opposed to something else. Right. Yeah. And then if you had to hazard a guess, what would you say the next one would be? Guidance document. Like AULs, maybe?
AULs, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think AULs. I think AULs are there again because of changes that have happened. And Peggy Shaw, is Peggy here? No, Peggy Shaw has been working on that update as well.
Okay.
So Peggy is working both on the public involvement and the AUL guidance.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? No.
This is Linda. I have a question, and I have to apologize. Maybe I heard this at one of your meetings, but I was hearing that the Biden administration is considering expanding the PFAS from 6 to 26 compounds. Has anyone heard anything about that? I don't remember where I read it or heard it. I'm very sorry. I just was wondering if it's on anybody's radar with you.
Yeah, I can't speak authoritatively about what the Biden administration is doing. I have read various things, and it's not sticking in my mind as much. And but they are certainly moving ahead on the PFAS and PFOA for considering drinking water standards and federal MCLs for those. I think they are looking to go beyond that for a few other chemicals. I think what you may have been hearing, they are also talking about more extensive testing, sampling, looking for things, particularly in public water supplies. So the last time that they did UCMR3, it was a much more limited list of compounds, I think less than 10 PFAS compounds. So I think they are looking to do more extensive testing in one of the upcoming UCMRs, probably 5 at this point. And I think that the target list for that analysis will be bigger, so that they have a better idea of what might be out there. So I think when you're talking about numbers up around 26 or greater, that's usually in the context of when they sample, how many of them will they actually be looking for? And that's more to get an idea of what's out there. It's not kind of a commitment to actually regulate or develop either toxicity values or standards in some way for that number of compounds. But
Yeah, New York DEC, I think, looks for 26. Just, you know, EPA's PFAS has the PFAS master list of PFAS substances, which was updated in September 2020. And just the current PFAS number of chemicals is 9,252 as of September 16th, 2020. So it's probably over 10,000 by now.
yeah, so I think
So
they
they'll never catch up.
yeah, EPA and all the states, everybody else is going to have to kind of figure out kind of how one deals with all of that. And there are ways of looking at, you know,
Yeah, I think the
total
DEA
amounts of fluoride and other
approach.
things. Yeah. But it's a question of, you know, how does, you know, when and how we go down that road. But part of it is beginning to gather the data for it and the ever expanding ways of looking at it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Nothing else? If you have nothing else asked to pass along, then we'll do this again next week. I think we're doing this again next week. Let me just make sure.
We lost Liz. Is she on vacation today?
No, she is probably working on MCP revisions so that we can have a useful and productive meeting tomorrow.
Oh, good. Good for her.
She is very dedicated like that.
She is indeed.
She is.
A model of dedication.
Yep. So Thursday, April 8th. Nothing conflicting, so we'll be back.
No.
Thank you, Paul.
We'll do it all again.
Thank you,
Have a
Paul.
good weekend. Enjoy what seems to be spring. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul.